I think my brain is malfunctioning. I just went to start doing the recording and I pressed the mute button.
I saw that and I was wondering if...
Yeah, I was literally talking.
Came into the room or you accidentally hit it.
No, I hit the mute button instead of the record button. Having one of those days.
Sure you said something. I'm sure you said something very funny.
Very, very funny and insightful. That's it. I'm really turning into one of those like old guys that like when the time change comes, I should be used to it by now. You know, I'm like approaching middle age here. I should be used to the idea that like in, you know, late November, it gets dark early and stuff. But every single year, I'm like, what's going on with this? I don't know. It takes me by surprise every time. It messes up my whole schedule, my whole tightly regimented schedule of mental and physical, you know, improvement. It's all off the rails right now.
Yeah, I mean, you wake up, you go to the content mines, you grind
exactly
the Fortnite Battle Pass, rinse and repeat.
That's right. And I've been taken out of this routine.
I'm sorry.
Very unfortunate. How was that? You did that whole Squid Game thing the other day. What was that? What was going on with that?
We did. Yeah, on Friday nights I host a show on the Young Turks called Game Busters. It's a gaming show, and the premise is we want the chat to fuck with people, like, and sometimes it'll be like if you gift a few subs, it'll impact the game. So if we play Fortnite, you have to drop our shit and like use all our mats to build you a giant house. 2 weeks ago, I had Lucas Kuntz, he's a populist Senate candidate from Missouri. We played Magic the Gathering because he's a huge Magic head. And
nice.
If people gifted subs, I would have to pass my turn or like not attack, depending on how many they gave. It was very funny. But this week we did a Crab Game, which is a free-to-play Squid Game knockoff. And you could have like lobbies of up to 40. So we had chat actually come in, and some fucking prick like shoved me off. Off one of the, because the games are like similar to the ones in the show. So it was like an iteration of the bridge, like glass panel game.
I actually have not watched the show.
Oh my God.
I'm one of the few people that is yet to get around to this.
I don't watch.
I'm tired
like,
all the time.
anything.
I don't know. I haven't been able to do it yet.
I get it. Because, you know, I typically don't watch TV. I don't watch a lot of movies. I'm just a gamer because it's more interesting. So that's what I'm doing in my free time. But I watched an episode on a whim one day because my buddies were talking about it a lot. And it's like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And the first episode like was nuts. And I had the whole series finished by the end of the next day.
Okay.
It's so cool. And it's great. It's a commentary on how desperate people will get when they're saddled with debt or under crushing economic systems. And it's interesting. But we played that. Which is
funny because I saw a number of takes about how the actual point is that communism is bad.
Dude, only a fucking dumbass would watch that and think that. I mean, it's the people who are pushing that were like people like The Federalist or whatever, Daily Wire, who everything is whatever they consume, they just project their views onto it, and it's always
we can't say anything bad about the daddy
communism.
Market.
Yeah, I mean, it's so obviously. I mean, even the creators of the show said it's about how capitalism is brutal.
Yeah,
but that's like so obviously, it's so heavy-handed. I mean, I don't think it's terrible, but it's like it's obvious when you watch it. That's what it's about, because they're living in a capitalist society that has crushed them in debt, and they have to resort to deranged things to try to get out of it.
Yeah. So in the game though, one of the cruel viewers was messing with you, I guess.
Yeah.
Damn.
You could like slap other characters by clicking the mouse. It's very simple. It's a very simple game, but you could slap one of the characters. And I was like on the edge of something, and some fucking prick slapped me and knocked me off. I died.
Well, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, but we had a lot of good folks play. A lot of friends of this show and our streams play. It was great. It was a ton of fun, and Rob bailed at the last second. He's a fucking fake friend.
As I do, as I'm known to do from time to time. Yeah, I'm sure it was fine without me. You did okay. So we have on the show today returning guest Dharna Noor, formerly of Gizmodo and now with the Boston Globe, currently climate reporter. A lot of stuff going on this front in terms of the COP26 just happened. We've got all the stuff in Joe Biden's Build Back Better framework to talk about. We've got stuff happening in Canada. We've got climate disasters and indigenous land defenders and climate protesters being assaulted and harassed and arrested by the RCMP. A lot of stuff to get into with Dharna. We had a really good conversation with her, and as usual with this program, it got a little grim at times, but I thought it was a really good talk, though.
Yeah, as usual. It was good. It was great.
One day we'll have a conversation that's like makes people feel good and inspired. Eventually, one of these times.
Our only real episode was the post Nevada one. Like that's it.
Yeah, it's been all downhill from there, isn't it? Damn.
That's it.
I listened back to that a couple weeks ago too.
Did you
it was
really?
Extremely painful
Why do you keep
to listen
doing this
to
yourself?
I don't know why I did
multiple
this.
Times.
I don't know why I did it. I was just kind of more curious to remember there was a moment where it felt like something good might happen. That was kind of nice, just to kind of revisit that. But it actually ended up making me feel worse. So
I'm sorry.
Before Dharna comes on again, it gets a little bit grim, and I don't want to talk about too much more depressing stuff before she even joins the show, but we should take a minute to talk about the Kyle Rittenhouse trial and the verdict that came through this week. Were you surprised by the outcome of the Rittenhouse trial?
No, not at all. As the case went on, and the more I saw from that judge, just the more unsurprising that verdict became. Like the conversation he had about screenshotting his text messages and emailing them to himself, and then them being illegible in his emails, and him saying that undercuts the prosecutor's arguments about a certain piece of evidence. The Trump theme song wasn't that big of a deal, but it was interesting on his ringtone. And then him letting Kyle pick the jurors out of the little tumbler, with a few other things, and not allowing prosecutors to call the victims, framing them as
what is with that? That's so bizarre.
What do you call them? Looters. Dehumanizing people.
Looters and rioters. Yeah, exactly.
And even shot and survived and testified. It just you kind of saw it coming.
I thought it was a little alarming when he picked up Rittenhouse and cradled him in his arms
kiss
and
on the head.
Called him a sweet, beautiful boy as well. I thought that was a little inappropriate and unprofessional also.
Yeah, but it just that wasn't surprising, and that's just there's this depressing conclusion that this kind of signals to other gun nuts that it's open season on protesters, and you already have states who are making it legal to drive into protests if they're in the street, which is just horrific. I mean, you have a right to freely assemble. It's in the same Bill of Rights that these gun nuts try to cling to.
Well, and when you look for the people that monitor this Telegram channels and the communications of these militia types and Proud Boys, they were really celebrating this. They were really excited by this, and it wasn't because it was some kind of a win in the marketplace of ideas or some kind of protection of rights and freedoms. They're really celebrating that it's going to be open season and on protesters in future incidents like this. That's really how they were openly kind of framing it. You saw that Kurt Schlichter guy as well, complete psycho, just saying these leftists got murdered and there's nothing you can do about it. Just really, really grim stuff, just really openly celebrating in the murder of these people. Really, really disturbing stuff that says nothing good about where any of this is going.
Right. I think if people were truly impacted by this on the right, I think the most reasonable read would be, okay, this is a guy who fucked up and now he gets, grace and mercy and a second chance and he should better himself. I think this kid knew exactly what he was doing, and you could see in his actions outside of court that he was reveling in it, and he put on a face for the judge and the jury. But it's absolutely craven when you have people like that celebrating like it's a sports team winning, because they enjoy that. They enjoy people on the other side getting killed. They like that. There's no hiding it. They revel in their political opponents literally being murdered. And that's disgusting. And it only gets worse from here. That's what's horrifying.
Yeah. And I guess just the sort of, I understand with the level of court system that it's at, it's not setting like a legal precedent, but it is setting some kind of precedent, right? In terms of like what is kind of acceptable in terms of these tense, dangerous situations. And what I kept coming back to as well was like, this idea of self-defense. And when you point out that like, well, one guy was rushing at Rittenhouse with a skateboard, one guy was rushing at him, he was armed, so he's defending himself. It's like cut and dry. But that's kind of like obfuscating this idea of like, why does he have the right to defend himself in this situation, but these other people that are involved in this dangerous situation where there's an active shooter who's already killed once and is now walking around still holding a dangerous assault weapon. Do they not have the right to defend themselves in this situation? Like, I guess not. I guess according to this sort of precedent that's being set, the only person that has this legal right of self-defense is the guy that was there with a dangerous firearm, and everyone else apparently doesn't have the same right, which, again, it's like, that's not leading anywhere good, especially when you kind of understand the framework that, these protests, whether it's for racial justice, whether it's for climate, there's going to be more of these protests and there's going to be more of this kind of stuff happening. And now it's kind of creating this situation where these sort of right-wing or militia types are going to feel really emboldened to go to these situations. And the moment that they feel like they're being threatened, or that they're the same excuse that police use in perpetuity to make excuses for when they kill, this now apparently has been extended to any sort of right-wing militia gun nut that's going to be showing up to one of these protests in the future, which is just really, really fucking alarming.
Yeah, I saw someone comment the other day in response to another friend of the show, a respectable lawyer, just the last person alive is innocent. And it's just like in these types of scenarios, like, doesn't matter if the guy who kills you has a gun. If you're charging him, or even if you're trying to disarm him, if he kills you, he's innocent because he was a scared boy, despite the fact that he's like it's a total mismatch because he's got a fucking assault rifle. Yeah.
And like under this legal framework, if one of these people had shot Rittenhouse, it probably would have been the same thing, So it's literally setting setting up the situation where, it's basically whoever is left standing in these incidents, they're going to have this right to claim that they were defending themselves. And that's it. And it's like, it's just going to make these situations way more volatile and way more violent.
Yes.
But I think the thing you were saying off the bat is just that, it wasn't surprising. I don't think anyone should be surprised by it. But it was certainly very depressing to see this kind of, to see this progress. I know for a while in this sort of like liberal left circles, it was kind of like you had a few kind of outliers kind of saying that Rittenhouse did nothing wrong, kind of defending him. And then it seemed like, especially over the last couple of weeks, that became kind of like on vogue, and you had a number of people kind of making this claim. And it's just, it's depressing. It's really messed up to see this kind of progression from when the incident took place and when there seemed to be kind of a consensus on it, to now, when you had a lot of people kind of like, even people that claim to be on the left, sort of taking Rittenhouse's side. Really discouraging stuff.
Yep. It's just grotesque, the reactions, like celebrating it, saying he did nothing wrong, selling merchandise like Don Jr. is doing. Really, really disgusting stuff.
Well, and then, like, because you said as well, he kind of put on airs during the trial, and then now he's doing they did a big, Tucker Carlson documentary, and now he's saying, oh no, I support racial justice and I support Black Lives Matter. And I guess everyone's just supposed to kind of take that at face value and not just like understand the extent to which this is just part of this narrative of like, oh, the media got this wrong, the media is kind of lying to you. The idea that he could be kind of exaggerating or just saying this is just completely, I guess, not an option. One somewhat funny thing though is to see the right-wing freak out, the people that were like raising him up as a hero, as soon as he said, oh no, I support racial justice. They were like, what? How dare you say that? That was kind of a minor sort of positive element that you could kind of take some kind of solace in to an overall situation that is just really fucking alarming and a really kind of ugly sign of where things could be possibly going when it comes to these big kind of protests.
And it looks like we're recording this on Monday night, where it's about 8:40. Kyle Rittenhouse is on with Tucker right now, and I don't know if I even want to look at clips. Just like enraging.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't do it. I can't do it. I know I saw there was a lot of people that have been like covering the trial extensively and talking about it a lot, but I just find it way too depressing. Yeah. Way too depressing to think too much about. But it was a pretty big news story this week, so I think it's important to sort of talk about it a little bit. And I guess, I don't think we need to spend too much more time on it, especially, like I said, we've got Dharna coming on. We've got this really great talk about the climate, Biden's agenda, what's happening in Canada right now. Really, really informative and great conversation with Dharna coming up. So let's put a pin in that. And let's bring on Dharna Noor of the Boston Globe. She's going to be joining the program right after this.
Joined by Dharna Noor. And Dharna, last time you joined us,
two-time champ.
Yeah, returning. Last time you joined us, we were, just being crushed under the weight of the crippling, draconian, archaic, regressive burger ban by the Biden administration.
Yeah. God, yeah, I know.
And I don't know how we all made it through that. It's traumatizing for all of us. I've since had burgers, restoring my freedom, my civil liberties.
Exactly. Don't tell anyone I went to the burger speakeasy the other week. Had an illegal burger.
Wow, this is crazy because I ate a burger earlier and I was literally murdered afterwards by the meat police.
Wild.
Biden's meat police.
You deserved it.
That's true. I wasn't aware that their jurisdiction came all the way up here, but learn something new every day, I guess.
Well, they're part of like the Trilateral Commission. It's like a Bilderberg thing. So it's just they can go everywhere. Speaking of burgers, everyone hypes up fucking In-N-Out, and I tried it a couple weeks ago, and it was so underwhelming relative to the hype, and people got mad at me for saying it's fine. But I'm going to Texas this week, and I'm gonna do the same thing with Whataburger. Just tweet out that it's fine, just to get a rise out of people who have weird, like regional, like pride in fast casual burger places.
Totally. I feel like saying it's fine is like somehow even more of an own than saying it's bad. Like if you're like Whataburger is awful, I feel like people will get less pissed about it than if you're like Whataburger is actually just fine.
Yeah, it's mediocre.
It's just okay.
It's amazing.
I felt the same way when I was in LA. I went to In-N-Out as well, and I was very excited. I'd been hearing about lots of hype about In-N-Out, and I tried it, and I found it pretty underwhelming.
Yeah.
It was like slightly better McDonald's. That's where I would. Yeah. That's where I would place that.
I don't get it. I also, if you had Shake Shack, Rob, Dharna, you probably have. It's more of an East Coast thing. It rocks.
Yeah, Shake Shack's definitely better. I think, honestly, people are just into In-N-Out because they love mayonnaise, but they don't want to admit that they want to eat that much mayonnaise on a burger. And they're like, I don't know what it is that makes it so amazing. And you're like, oh, well, it's probably...
maybe it's all this egg and oil and fat I put on.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Animal style.
Yeah. I had the burger animal style, and still, it was like, oh, okay, it's like a burger with Thousand Island. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. People take this shit very seriously, though. It's true. Regional burger wars.
Get a life. Become a gamer.
Exactly. Why don't you get a real hobby, okay?
Yeah. Dharna, I think you confirmed last time you were on you are a gamer. Are you still?
I confirmed last time that I'm not a gamer, unfortunately, and I have not worked on it. I'm really sorry.
Why did we invite her back on?
I'm so sorry. I should have lied, honestly. The problem is if I lie, you're going to like ask me questions that I won't know the answer to. I'll just be like,
you
like
can't
the
steal
one with the cute animals. I don't know.
Yeah, I know that one. You can't steal gamer valor here. Like that's kind of our
that's our little offensive project. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I had friends get spawn killed holding a controller. You don't get to claim that valor.
Oh god.
I died face down in the muck in Call of Duty.
God, I'm sorry that I would even joke about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is serious business.
Clearly.
Rob's, your gaming days are probably over, huh? Because your computer broke.
Yeah, I had a little bit of a scare. Bit of a scare with my computer, which I thought was maybe bricked. Had to bring it in for repairs, but it's only a minor setback. I'm going to be right back in the competitive gaming circuit, hopefully by tomorrow. I've been grinding on Fortnite to get the Carnage skin, and I tell myself it's for my son because he really likes the the skins and stuff. So it's like, oh, I don't really care myself, but he really likes it. So I guess I'll have to continue playing Fortnite all the time to get these skins, I guess, you know.
What is the Carnage skin? The Carnage skin? What is the Carnage skin?
Well, it's just you have different skins, and they have different tie-ins with different like films and comic books and stuff. So you can just like be Carnage running around in the Fortnite world. My son is very, very into the whole symbiotes, Venom and Carnage and all the other various B tier symbiotes that are also out there. He's obsessed with it. He loves that stuff.
This is a Marvel thing, right? God, I'm like doing such a bad job at keeping up with this, right? This is a Marvel thing, I think. I hope
yes.
so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Venom, Carnage. They're offshoots of the Spider-Man universe. They started as Spider-Man villains, but then they kind of spun off into their own thing.
I see.
You're not missing anything. All that shit sucks, Dharna. That's fine. The skin that I've been using a lot lately is the Ariana Grande skin, which is, I think, just hilarious that she's in Fortnite. Yeah, you just play as Ariana Grande. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Damn.
Pretty cool.
Maybe I should get into it.
Yeah. They've got something for everyone to spend their money on.
I love choice.
Yeah, it's peak consumer choice. But on a serious note, Dharna, you're here because you are a climate reporter, and you have, been covering the latest developments in the Biden administration on the climate front. So who better to come in and talk about like another COP26 recap? And
I'm thrilled because the climate's fixed.
It is.
It's wonderful. Well, I was really inspired by all the big speeches and everything at COP26.
Exactly. It turns out
they cut some deals.
Actually, yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're good to go.
Exactly.
They capitulated to the coal industry. It was great.
Yeah. Clean coal. They wash it off first, so it makes it not as polluted. So
scrub it with toothbrushes.
That's right. That's how you employ so many people too. You get everyone to work scrubbing coal with toothbrushes. Yeah.
And there's also been some developments in the oil pipeline front we want to get into with you. But to go back to what we mentioned, there's this global climate conference, and we talked about it on the last episode, and kind of how the leaders of our generation have inspired mostly cynicism among young people. And we've said we felt like that event was just another iteration, which was funny because Obama spoke talking about how leaders of our generation have let us down, him being one of them.
So he left that part out, actually.
Exactly.
He just forgot. He was pressed for
not
time.
Me. Not me. I'm still very inspired, but everyone else is very, I can see why it's very disappointing for everyone.
Yeah,
He's
that wasn't me, people, he said.
His hands were tied. It was just the cabinet. It was everyone he appointed.
Exactly. It turns out the president has no power, actually.
Yeah, they only had 59 senators, so they can't do anything with that.
If only we voted harder. Yeah. But Dharna, what were some of your takeaways from COP26? Are you feeling inspired?
Yeah, I'm feeling. I guess, like, all jokes aside, it's really horribly depressing.
That's why we're trying to inject some levity into the whole conversation. Artificially.
It's really bad. I think the only good thing about COP26 maybe, or like whatever, there are other small good things, but maybe the best part of it is that it actually could not ever have done all that much anyway. So the fact that it was a disappointment is like not surprising, and it was no more of a disappointment than anyone should have expected it to be, which is like a pretty awful reason to feel good. But at least the thing that was totally botched never really had the power to do all that much in the first place. So yeah, I mean, as always, like, lots of beautiful speeches, lots of big, vague promises. And then when it came down to it, the language that actually got into this agreement, which isn't even binding in the first place, really, was just like, a joke compared to like the scale of action that we actually need to, like, secure a livable future and stuff like that. So yeah, pretty bad stuff, I would say.
Seems bad.
Something that we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks and months is the climate components of Biden's Build Back Better framework getting kind of meticulously kind of chiseled away at. I know during the Democratic primary, during the election, a lot of people would often say, like, look at, certainly Biden doesn't support the Green New Deal, and he's in fact vocally said that he's against something like that. But you got to look at all these great things in his climate plan. It's this big $1 trillion, comprehensive agenda that we should all be excited about. And, over the course of the last couple of weeks, that's all just been kind of like evaporating away, which made it kind of funny because when they're going to COP26 there and kind of like trying to present this idea that they've been having all the kinds of success in that area, they haven't actually made a deal yet, and they still haven't really like actually done anything in terms of enacting this big agenda.
Totally.
Can you like are you plugged into exactly what is still in this agenda? Not that they've even passed anything yet, but like, is there anything to feel good about this in terms of what Biden is trying to propose and what might still have a remote possibility of actually passing at this point?
I mean, the Build Back Better Act that the House passed last week does have some really good things in it. I mean, again, like just dwarfed by the level of like action that we actually need, but it has some good things in it. The problem is, right, like who knows if any of that will actually survive, and who knows if Biden will actually try to like fight for its survival when it comes to Joe mentioning Christian cinema, etc. There are, there's like investments in there to help people save money on their energy bills, even though it's nowhere near enough money. There's money for like e-bikes, even though it's nowhere near enough money. There's money for a civilian climate corps, even though there's nowhere near enough. And yet these things are being touted as though they have any chance in our current climate of like actually making it anywhere. So that's the sort of stuff that we need congressional approval for. And then, on the like level that Biden can actually control, from the White House, we've seen some pretty devastating shit too. Just 2 weeks ago, the Biden administration held the largest oil and gas sale in U.S. history, or the largest offshore oil and gas sale in U.S. history, rather. And that's despite the fact that Biden ran on at least temporarily halting drilling on public lands and in public waters. And that's already, you're talking about like public lands and public waters, which is already a tiny fraction of like where drilling actually happens. You're talking about a temporary provision to halt it, but still, that would have been better than nothing. And now it turns out, what we actually are getting is basically nothing, or worse than nothing, as it were, right? Like this is an even bigger lease sale than anything that the Trump administration ever held. So, I mean, yeah, it's pretty clear that on the global scale, we're seeing the same thing where leaders are making all of these pledges and then, all of the data is showing that those pledges are not really bearing out. And I think that's similar to what we're sort of seeing on the domestic front. Yeah.
So this plot in the Gulf that was auctioned off is bigger than the state of Texas, I believe. Is that right? It was like 800 square miles or something like that.
And I think 80 million acres was the figure. It's larger than New Mexico.
So obviously just a colossal piece of land, and breaks with a pretty explicit campaign promise of no new offshore drilling. And now we have like Chevron and I think like Exxon, who are like very quickly chomping at the bit to get in on the action. And I want to add that Chevron is also the same company that has sought to destroy Stephen Donzinger's life because they polluted indigenous communities in Ecuador, and he took them to task, and they then just went out of their way. We've talked about it on the show a lot, but they went out of their way to just ruin his life. So
and now he's in prison, and Biden has said nothing.
Yes. Oh, and not only has he said nothing, it's also the DOJ published or filed a brief in that case.
That's right.
That supported the use of a private prosecutor that Chevron had litigate the case. It's insane, but we've talked about that a lot in the show. It's nuts. So this breaks with the campaign promise, but there's a little bit of a complicating factor because this was a Republican-led legal effort to block any attempts by the Biden administration to prohibit offshore drilling. Is that right?
Yeah, that's so for sure. Like when the Biden administration first took the White House, they issued this executive order to put this temporary moratorium on new public oil and gas leases, which is, the kind of thing that like obviously some attorneys generals are going to get pissed about. And yeah, so, some states led by Louisiana, I think 13 states led by Louisiana, sued them over it. And in June, a federal judge basically ruled in their favor. That all happened, and the Biden administration is saying that in order to comply with the federal judge's ruling, they have to keep, having oil and gas lease sales. That's what the Biden administration is saying about this. But I don't know. I mean, I talked to some kind of legal experts who basically made it seem like this is just way more than the administration has to do in order to comply with this order. Like, the order says that you can't have a blanket stop on these sales, fine. But that doesn't mean that you have to, like you still have all of the discretion that you had before. Like the Department of Interior doesn't only have the responsibility to sell oil and gas leases. It also has the, responsibility to like protect the environment, to protect people, protect the climate. And this pretty clearly does not align with any of those goals. There's nothing in the order that says like the Interior has to hold this lease sale. It just says that the Interior cannot implement a pause on leasing. So, I mean, it's not the first time that we've seen the Biden administration sort of hide behind some sort of legal order in order to basically do what, kind of maintain the status quo. And I think that's pretty clearly what we're seeing here, despite its sort of, hemming and hawing about how it had to do this. It had no choice.
Yeah, there's probably a middle ground between nothing at all and the biggest in U.S. history.
Exactly.
And we see how they mince words, find loopholes and exploits, weasel around and kind of, get a little blurry with the details when it is, a more progressive or populist position. Like, for instance, the checks thing is something we saw them walk back. After going from $2,000 checks to, we're going to actually continue on the 400 or 600, whatever, 800 that you got from Trump and just settle the difference, which is like when they want to do something like that, they'll absolutely figure out how best to maneuver around whatever obstacles are in their way. But here it's just balls to the wall. Here, yeah, just take the most of the fucking Gulf. It's horrifying. And with so many of these types of things, especially campaign promises, there just doesn't seem to be any political will to do a lot of these things. And that's just really, really frustrating because these are long-term consequences. I think the spike in emissions that are going to result from this are going to just drastically impact the next 20 to 30 years of carbon emissions. Yeah,
100%. And like that, and it's a really important point that it's not just right now. Like, just because these leases are getting sold right now, if they're drilled in, it doesn't mean that anyone's going to be able to actually develop them immediately. It could take like 10 years to even start. And that means like, we're past 2030, past the point where lots of scientists say that we need to be completely done with like all oil and gas drilling. And we're going to be starting new oil and gas drilling. Like, it's just, it's just utterly absurd. And this is, it's not particularly surprising coming from an administration that's also like upheld the Trump era decision to drill in the Arctic and like suppressed lots of like youth-led climate lawsuits and refused to shut down a bunch of pipelines. It's true. It's a complete lack of like interest in actually defending the agenda that they ran on. Also, like, I wrote about this oil and gas lease sale for the Boston Globe, and some people got in touch with me and were basically like, look, maybe he technically could have stopped this from happening, but that doesn't mean it would be like politically easy for him. It would be political suicide for him to do this. Like, it would invite so many more lawsuits. And yeah, I mean, like, I don't care. Yeah, exactly. Like, it would be, I would expect that when it comes to something that's like an issue of life and death, like any sort of politician with integrity would still like do the hard thing and invite all of the bullshit lawsuits and everything and, do it anyway. So, what's possible is not always what's easy, but like, no one ever said it was going to be easy. It shouldn't be easy to to be the president. So
yeah, I mean, like, it might be political suicide to do it now, but it might be actual suicide to continue along and pretend that like we can't do any of these big solutions.
God, that's right. Yeah, I don't want to overheat the economy and just want to overheat
exactly.
the planet.
We wouldn't want
right?
that.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to ask about COP26 as well is that I saw, especially from representatives from the U.S., from the Biden administration, and from Canada as well, and a lot of kind of Western nations, there was a lot of talk, which I felt a little bit like a deflection from their own lack of action about like the developing world and about China specifically. Without including a lot of the context about China, like obviously China produces a lot of emissions, but when they were kind of being lectured by all these like representatives from the Biden administration repeatedly from COP26, was always kind of left out about how, per capita, their emissions are less than the United States. I mean, it's a country of 1.4 billion people, kind of completely ignoring the work that China is doing right now in terms of like reforestation and building all this high speed rail and like actually like taking action to confront this in the future, like take measurable action, which is kind of we're not doing, and just kind of the basic idea as well that like we've offshored all of our manufacturing to China and the rest of the developing world, Bangladesh and all these other places, which increases their emissions naturally. Like I'm sitting here talking on a laptop that was probably made in China, that counts towards their emissions, but it's not because they're producing all of the stuff that we're all using. And all of this context was kind of completely left out of these kind of condescending lectures from the part of the people from the Biden administration as we're kind of deflecting the blame and talking about how, really it's China's fault and India's fault and these other developing countries.
God, yeah, 100%. 100% agree with all of those points. And then also, like, on top of that, China is maybe the largest emitter now, as you said, in large part because they're manufacturing so much shit for like the US and the rest of the global north. But the US is the largest historical emitter. Like, I mean, the question of who has more of a responsibility, even if it were not, like, even if there wasn't this huge discrepancy in per capita emissions, the question of whose responsibility it is to like kind of take on climate change from a historical perspective is like, I mean, there's just no question that the US is more responsible. So yeah, I mean, the idea that like the US needs to look to China to lead the climate fight is just laughable. I'm shocked, like, time and time again to see this talking point get parroted by like even the most well-meaning kinds of people.
And, also the US military is one of the largest, if not the largest emitters, in the world. And
exactly,
if we really wanted to take on our own emissions in a meaningful way, drastic cuts to the military would be the response. But instead, we're currently debating an increase on the already increased military budget this week with the NDAA, adding on, I think, another 25 or so billion more than what Congress had initially asked for, which is already an increase.
Right.
It's weird that they can do that, isn't it? Just like, oh yeah, do you need more? Do you need a couple more billion? We can do that. That's no problem.
Only the military.
I was under the impression that without these two wars that Biden purportedly ended,
that's $1 trillion or something.
That these are definitely not over, and they've just moved to more unseen aerial global warfare. But liberals seem to like think that this is for sure over and done with. But with those two boots on the ground operations having ended, I would assume that would mean less of a need for increased spending. But that's not the case. And at COP26, Abby Martin of the Empire Files asked Pelosi and Pallone specifically about this, and asked how you could say, like, oh, we're taking this seriously when your actions simply on the military budget alone kind of flies in the face of that. And they both kind of said, oh, these aren't inconsistent. Like, we take this very seriously, this and that. Not really a meaningful or substantive response, but it's totally bogus, because we're just going to continue doing the same old stuff with a few little bells and whistles here and there, patting ourselves in the back. But you've got an increase in military spending, you've got more offshore drilling, you got pipelines across North America, you won't ban fracking, and maybe these tax credits for electric bicycles are going to be what saves us.
Yeah, exactly. The vast majority of the climate shit that's in Build Back Better is, of course, tax incentives. And I mean, yes, okay, so on the like military front too, part of what Pelosi said when Abby asked her about this at COP26 and what like the DoD has been saying forever is, they justify these like just grossly inflated military budgets by saying that climate change is a national security threat. And yet again, today we see like our Secretary General and shit like that being like, oh yeah, we need more resources to fight climate change, and climate change is a national security threat. And where does that mean the resources need to go? The Department of Defense, which is already by far the largest institutional emitter in the world, like not just the country, the world. The largest institutional consumer of gas and oil in the world. It's a really, really disgusting, vicious cycle that apparently nobody in our party leadership is really willing to take on.
Another thing that I wanted to dispel as well, this is something we heard a lot about at COP26, is the idea of net zero. We're going to get to net zero by 2050 and these kind of big pledges. Biden's been talking about this. Of course, Justin Trudeau has been talking about this a lot, net zero. And the thing that should be raising people's alarms about this idea is the fact that Exxon and all these big oil companies are also very, very enthusiastic about the idea of getting to net zero emissions.
That's right.
Can you break down a little bit about like what that actually means? Because it's kind of like a rhetorical trick to make people think that we're going to be getting to zero emissions, which is not actually the case, is it? Like, can you talk a little bit about what net zero actually means in reality? That's not kind of based in the sort of marketing speak of our political leaders.
Yeah, totally. Net zero can mean a number of things. I think the two biggest things that it means when it's invoked at something like the climate talks are carbon trading, which is basically ExxonMobil can emit however much carbon pollution I want to. But if I just pay for some green projects in other places, which, by the way, are frequently tied to like all sorts of human rights abuses, if I pay for reforestation or, like solar power manufacturing or something somewhere else, then that, like all of the carbon that those projects would in theory remove from the atmosphere count against mine. So I'm emitting however much I want to, but because I've like contributed to carbon also being removed from the atmosphere, I have zeroed out my emissions, which is, obviously, like that doesn't do anything about the pollution that happens in the first place. And in some cases, it's actually worse than nothing. Like, when it comes to reforestation, there's been tons and tons of evidence that like in places like Indonesia, all over the African continent, etc., these have been tied to like, land grabs and removing indigenous people from their homes, like their historic homes. So, in many cases, far worse than doing nothing at all. The other big thing that it frequently means is carbon capture and storage, which is
these very real technologies that totally exist and will exist very shortly. Yes, of course.
That's right. And they're working so well right now, which is why the only coal plant that actually had carbon capture and storage facilities actually shut down in the US recently. But yeah, as you're sort of saying, carbon capture and storage are like, machines that are supposed to exist, that are supposed to like scrub carbon from the atmosphere. And I think I'm coming around to the idea that maybe like these will have to play some sort of tiny role for emissions from steel, like from shit like concrete and steel and things like this, some tiny role, if we can actually like get them to exist. But the idea that they should be able to replace getting off of oil and gas and coal is just like, no one actually believes this, right? Like there is no person who knows anything about climate change truly believes that we're going to be able to just keep emitting at the current rate and keep like, expanding oil and gas and coal and everything and be fine if we just have carbon capture and storage. But, it allows these, the oil companies, et cetera, to like maintain the same business plans and not really do anything differently. So of course they
the amazing thing also is that like, in fact, there does exist an incredible carbon capture invention already known as a tree. which ironically we're chopping down now in huge numbers and not replacing with new trees. That's one thing Justin Trudeau has talked about his own climate plan, to say nothing of all the different pledges that he's made that haven't come through. That's one thing that like that he would say that's part of our sort of climate agenda is planting 1 billion trees. And literally he's been in power in Canada for six 7 years now, and not one of these trees has actually been planted. So
exactly.
That's the really discouraging thing, is that even the things that we can control, like that's something that we could actually do. It's a technology that does exist. It wouldn't be that hard to actually get the process rolling on that to start, this process of reforestation that would actually help things. But we're not even doing that. That's when I start to really feel alarmed about our future prospects here for confronting this.
Yeah, totally. And in the US and Canada and whatever, everywhere, we're not only not planting more trees, but we're continually still cutting them down. Like the largest national forest in the US, in Southeast Alaska, I think, the Tongass is completely under attack now for, again, more oil and gas drilling. So you're cutting down things that suck carbon from the atmosphere in order to build more things that add more carbon to the atmosphere, and then you're not even replacing the trees in the first place. It's just total clusterfuck. It's great.
Yeah, and in Brazil as well, the rainforest in Brazil being cut down to make space for cattle farming, and again also not being replaced by anything as well, which I believe the largest carbon sink on the entire planet. Also kind of alarming.
Did you see that that Elon Musk has been discussing with the Bolsonaro administration, starting some sort of Tesla Amazon rainforest monitoring service? Elon Musk
great.
might get to make money off of monitoring deforestation.
Well, now I feel better. I don't know why I was panicking there.
Yeah, exactly. Elon will save us.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
If that technology would be as good as his amazing tunnel technology, then we're in good hands, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
We can definitely tech our way out of this as long as Elon's at the helm.
So another thing I saw in Build Back Better were tax credits and incentives for, speaking of Elon Musk, electric vehicles along with electric bikes. And I noticed that the phase out for e-bikes is at a much more rapid clip than for vehicles. And sure, the bikes are cheaper, but it seems like we're still, pushing toward a status quo adjacent approach to all of this. And obviously the emissions from electric vehicles are, non-existent compared to standard gasoline-powered cars, but there's an issue with the batteries, isn't that right? This is something I don't know much about, but isn't there the batteries in production still is hazardous?
Yeah, so there's the two sort of main problems with electric vehicles is one, if you are still if they're electric but they're still powered by a grid that's mostly powered by fossil fuels. That is better than diesel-powered vehicles in most places, but that's only going so far. You still have to decarbonize the entire grid in order for those to be better. And so in the immediate term, that's why just having fewer vehicles on the road in general is the right idea for one. The other thing is, as you're sort of saying, it takes a lot of shit to make electric vehicles. And maybe that's not going to result in as many carbon emissions, but it doesn't mean that it's totally safe. It requires, for instance, lithium ion batteries for a lot of these vehicles to run, and lithium ion batteries are pretty environmentally destructive to make. They can deplete water resources in places where there's already droughts. They can, they've been the cause of, again, displacement of many people. It's also not exactly a renewable resource. And it's not just lithium ion batteries. I think that's the main one that people talk about, but there's other things steel and plastic and all the other shit that it takes to make a car in general. That doesn't mean we should never have any electric vehicles, but it does certainly mean if you can have, on the one hand, a bus that can transport 50 people versus a car that can transport 4 people, and use the same amount of resources to make the battery that vehicle runs on. It's just a no-brainer which one you should really be going for. And yet we've seen, there's some talk of investments and tax breaks and shit like that for more public transportation, but just nowhere near the level that we're seeing for shit like building out charging infrastructure and manufacturing for electric vehicles, which is really, really bad. But again, like unsurprising, lots and lots of opportunities for lots of people to make money off of these things. So.
Yeah, well, it really speaks to our sort of inability to reimagine anything rather than just doubling and tripling down on the status quo. Of course, we know America's kind of been built on this sort of car culture. And it's this idea that like, oh no, we can keep that. We can all keep that culture in place. But we're just going to make it green, rather than, as you pointed out, really making an effort to reduce the number of vehicles, electric or otherwise, that are on the road by making these massive investments in public transit, in like national and international high-speed rail and these things.
Yeah.
We have this complete inability to try and reimagine the way that we view transport in our society, rather than just like the way that we've been doing things for the last century.
Totally.
And,
like even if it weren't for climate reasons, you can just imagine if carbon emissions were not a problem at all, like it would still be better for so many reasons to just have more public transit, right? Like it's really fucking expensive to own a car. Tons of people die in car accidents every year. Highways were like in many cases actually created to destroy communities, especially like Black communities in the United States. There's so many reasons that we should be moving away from this car-centric culture besides just climate. But, like kind of siloing it to this one issue makes it seem like EVs are the answer.
I found the oil offshore drilling to be a total break from the Biden campaign promise, pretty explicitly saying, like in response to Trump, because Trump had supported it and then tried to walk it back as the campaign got closer. Biden was saying like no new offshore drilling, and we've seen kind of like a meager attempt to take on climate change recently from the administration. And this was, at the onset, Biden tried to frame himself as the climate president. I mean, are there reasons to feel good at all? Or is this just totally like bogus, kind of hollow posturing with a few tweaks around the edges?
I mean, I guess kind of like it depends on what you feel good about. Like there's a lot of talk about historic measures, about unprecedented measures. And it's true that there have been some of those, right? Like the infrastructure bill included some historic and unprecedented climate measures. The Build Back Better bill right now, even if it gets cut down, will still amount to the largest investment in like climate infrastructure ever seen in the US. All of that is true. Biden has done some historic things, but those things are still completely just like, dwarfed by the level of action that we actually need. And so I think it kind of depends like what yardstick you're using. If the yardstick you're using is like what we actually need to survive, which I think is the important one, no, I don't think that we should be feeling hopeful at all. And I don't think that we should be like applauding any of these actions from that standpoint. But politically, like, sure, maybe he's moved the needle. The problem is that we don't really have a ton of time to like slowly move the needle on this issue, right? Like we're running out of time to lower carbon emissions before we get to truly catastrophic levels of global warming. So.
And another thing that I think no one's really addressing as well is that a lot of these like quote unquote historic investments are all going to be happening, over the next decade.
True.
Like it's not anything that's going to like be implemented right away. And that also would require, Biden or the Democratic Party to retain control of the political process in the United States, which right now is not really looking like a very solid prospect. Like Biden's polling right now completely underwater. It looks at the moment, unless some drastic change happens, that they're heading for complete electoral disaster over the next couple of years. And like I feel like there's a strong likelihood that there's just going to be some other reactionary climate denier in charge of the levers of power in the U.S. government pretty soon. Whether it's Donald Trump himself coming back or someone else, it's not looking very positive for the ability for them to even like live up to or fulfill these big promises that they're trying to make right now, even if you might find some stuff in there that you can feel okay about.
Yeah, God, 100%. I don't think that polling is obviously everything. There's lots of reasons to not trust polls, and there's lots of reasons to like not let them kind of define your politics or whatever. But there's lots and lots of evidence that Americans are really down to vote for transformative climate policy. So even just on that basis alone, like you would think it would at least be in Biden's best interest to try to secure some more votes by like sticking to some of his promises. But you're right, like it's looking really, really bad for him right now. And that's, I think, entirely his own fault. So, it's like again, bad cycle to get in. You don't pass any like truly transformative policies. You kind of kick the can down the road, and then you ruin your ability to actually do anything later by not passing the transformative policies that people want to vote for.
That's always been the really weird thing about seeing a lot of this process play out, is how popular a lot of these big, bold, progressive policies, whether it's with climate or anything else, how popular they are and how well they actually poll, where if they actually fought for it, that might actually mean a positive thing. That might actually lead to them, being able to secure more electoral victories and things like that. But it seems like even what they've done so far, there's already these very prominent voices in the Democratic Party, in the sort of establishment liberal media saying like, oh no, you've gone too far. This is why you're losing now, is because people are too put off by your extremist policies that you're implementing here.
Exactly.
And that's ridiculous to say, but it seems like there's a lot of people still in the Democratic Party that buy into this idea that like, oh, we can't overreach because then that's going to cost us, while ignoring all the ways that like these kind of bold policies, particularly when it comes to climate, are super popular, and that would probably get a lot of people very excited if they actually meaningfully pushed for them.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Especially if you tie them to like improving people's lives in the meanwhile, shit like decarbonizing buildings, or like, having more green public housing, or having more public transit, things like this. Like there's lots of things that you can even do to appeal to people who don't care at all about climate change, but appeal to like their immediate concerns that are also very, very good for the atmosphere. But not a lot of focus there, it seems.
Which is amazing too, because that's the entire point of what the Green New Deal is supposed to be about.
Exactly.
Which Biden has explicitly said that he's against, and Pelosi famously called it the Green Dream, I believe.
Whatever.
Yeah, or whatever was her. Great. Yeah. Good
Our
stuff.
Inspiring leaders. Love it.
I mean, speaking of feeling inspired, I just saw, I sent it in our chat here. Biden is going to run again in 2024, according to Jen Psaki. In 2022, he will be 82. And like you said, whether polling is reflective of actual performance or not remains to be seen. But he's not doing well. But also, they're probably going to get shellacked in the midterms next year. And because that's just kind of how history is. After a change in administration, midterms are typically pretty bad, at least in the House, for the party in power. And it doesn't look like...
especially after not delivering on the things that you can't.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Well.
Like, they're not going to have a lot to run on. I mean, what are you going to have? If they don't
this
cancel
time we're really going to do it.
Yeah, what are you going to say?
You need to vote a little bit more.
We need what? Like, your own party is standing in your way. Like, you can't even control your own party.
This time, after we lose our majorities, then we're really going to do it.
Yeah. And it's going to be infrastructure, which, hey, that construction that makes you late for work, that was us. Like, that's it. Totally. I mean, what are you going to... People aren't going to associate tax credits if they even know how to claim them or redeem them or qualify for them or actually have the means to buy a car or e-bike or whatever. Maybe I don't know if the child tax credit, child income, whatever, tax credit is going to be enough to get them over the hump. Because people don't typically associate that kind of stuff specifically with the party in power, because it's like so distant from election day.
Yeah, totally. I mean, even just like on the level of, messaging is like stupid. Like the actual thing of import is the actual action that we get out of the administration. But even just on that front, like, okay, if you're going to make your whole fucking thing about these like tax breaks, at least do something to make sure that people know about them. But it's like even these tiny things, they don't seem to really care about voters who they're going to need being able to actually have access to and any knowledge of. It's pretty, just on every level, it seems like they're really, not interested in winning or whatever. It's like that, we are unelectable and we hate ourselves thing from The Simpsons.
We've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.
That's the way. Exactly.
Yeah. And listen, like I mentioned Trudeau, I don't want to make you to think that I think it's all America's fault and it's all the American political process is the problem, because we're seeing a number of things happening in Canada right now, which is also, filling me with the exact same sense of existential dread. There's massive flooding happening in BC right now, kind of unprecedented. One of these like once in a generation things that now seems to be happening multiple times a generation.
That's right.
Just 3 months ago, there was massive wildfires, also unprecedented. And now 3 months later, many of these same areas are now experiencing this massive flooding. You have huge infrastructure damage. And part of this is related as well, because like the forestry is a sort of natural barricade to these kinds of like flooding and mudslides and things that we're seeing in BC. But because of all the logging activity and the wildfires, now it's having this kind of like feedback loop effect. We're seeing massive environmental devastation in BC right now. And what we're seeing as well is that rather than kind of focus on taking that moment to push through like radical climate action, and by the way, it's not the mean conservatives that are in charge in BC. It's not even the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party. It's our wonderful, benevolent Social Democratic Party, the NDP, are in charge in BC right now. And rather than taking this moment to say, okay, we need real, substantive, climate action right now, and taking that moment to really act on some of these big ideas, they're literally sending in the RCMP as the basically publicly subsidized armed thugs to force through this Coastal Gaslink Pipeline. And they're going into these blockades that have been erected in Wet'suwet'en territory, which is unceded land. It's literally not even Canada.
Yep.
And, violently assaulting and arresting Indigenous climate protesters. And it's really, really horrific to see. And that's the kind of thing that I hope people start to realize when it comes to Canada as well, is that, it really is that's really Canada, like fulfilling its whole purpose. Like that's exactly what Canada is. I mean, it would be alarming at any point, but it's extra alarming when it's happening in the midst of this massive climate devastation. The people that are putting their bodies on the line to ensure that this kind of infrastructure doesn't get built and the problem doesn't get worse are the ones that are getting the brunt of the state violence. It's really, really upsetting.
Yeah, 100%. And this is like a fight that's been going on for quite a while. I remember doing some reporting last year on, again, like this just awful, violent sort of crackdown on protesters on Wet'suwet'en territory, where the Coastal Gaslink Pipeline is supposed to, be built, and then kind of goes away. They get away with it completely. Now they arrested another 30 people, and part of the reason they can get away with it is because they're like also now arresting members of the press who are trying to get the story out there to people. Not that arresting like journalists is in some way worse than arresting Indigenous protesters, obviously. But that's the thing. It's the only thing that seems to get actual journalists to pay attention. Totally.
It's like, hey, this is now it's bad. Now it's upsetting. We have to really focus on this now.
Totally, which is awful and fucked up and should not be the case. But I mean, I don't think that it's I don't think that it's unintentional, I guess, to try to crack down on also like the people who would make it so that, that the two groups of people who could possibly raise any sort of stink about this are the protesters who are having the action in the first place and the journalists who are covering it. And there's been massive crackdowns on both groups of people, which means that the whole thing will just somehow go away. There'll be no accountability, it seems, despite like whatever sort of violence is inflicted against protesters and journalists.
Yeah, and it's similar to what we saw as well at the Standing Rock protests.
Exactly.
Which happened under Obama as well, it made it extra disgusting to see Obama sort of lecture everyone about not being enthusiastic enough about these incremental policies when he was the one that was kind of overseeing that when that was happening. Which is continuing under Biden as well. Another thing as well, that when it comes to these kinds of pipeline projects, specifically this Coastal Gaslink Pipeline, there's this kind of rhetorical trick that these oil companies use to try and justify these projects when they talk about how it impacts these communities, and including these Indigenous partners getting these jobs. They're getting jobs for this pipeline. It's improving their material conditions. It's helping these communities. But there's this kind of two-step that's happening when it comes to like the jobs versus versus the profits. That's the kind of thing that I try to remind people of as well when we talk about this, which is that it's not like these are like national oil companies and we're becoming energy independent because we're building these pipelines, or it's like we're moving this product to the market, as we often hear about, and then it's going into infrastructure in schools and social programs in this country. That is not what is happening.
Going abroad, like
you have maybe a few hundred or a few thousand people that are actually employed by these companies, and great for them. But the actual profits from these projects, first of all, the product is going again to offshore. They're going to like Texas owned or like Saudi owned oil companies. All the profits are going towards like the CEOs and shareholders of these companies and getting parked in like offshore tax havens. There's literally no real benefit to the people in this country, but the way that the government and the oil companies sell this to people is that it's this really positive thing that's impacting these communities and bringing jobs and prosperity to these communities and energy independence. It's 100% bullshit. Totally. And I don't think enough people are completely aware of that.
Yeah, agreed. I think that like if anything showed us how little the executives and the shareholders and shit care about the workers, it was COVID, right? Where there's like,
yes,
executives are getting massive, especially oil executives, I think, are getting like massive pay increases, and shareholders are seeing record profits and all of this shit, and then they're laying off workers in droves. And
of course, all these projects were also exempt from any of the public health guidelines. And in fact, they doubled and tripled down and increased production in a lot of these things for the exact reason that they knew that there'd be less resistance and there'd be less blockades and less people, paying attention to what they were doing while this big crisis was going on.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And I mean, we've seen like over many, many decades, the kinds of health issues that the workers too can see from this kind of, dirty infrastructure build out, but doesn't really seem to enter the conversation when we're talking about jobs. So,
Rob, on the Canadian point, there was a comment I think Trudeau made shortly after COP26 where he said something like, "We're an oil and gas country." Was that right?
Yeah. A company.
No, he said
We're an
company.
oil and gas company.
Yeah. Oh,
that's the thing. He misspoke. That he said the quiet part out loud. It was really amazing.
Yeah.
Because that's what people that are in this that live in this country that are kind of like involved in these conversations. That's what we've been saying for a long time. It isn't actually a real country. It's a completely fake country. It is basically a oil and gas producing company, and as well as logging and mining as well.
Yep.
And then we kind of have this kind of fake culture, this fake democratic system to give this veneer of legitimacy to it. But that's what it's really about. And that was the amazing thing about that clip, was that he was really just saying what this country really is, and kind of misspoke. And you could tell that as soon as he said it, he was like, "Ooh, whoops." Kind of wasn't supposed to say that part out loud, but okay. Yeah, exactly. But it was really amazing. It was a really amazing moment.
Yeah, I'm sorry for you. That is just like that's that cynicism from these folks is just, it's so maddening. I don't know what we do. I don't know where we go from here, because it seems like oil and gas and their lobbyists just have a stranglehold on all of these countries, and coal here and in China just block any even feeble attempt to address this problem, and they're all going to be dead and gone when the consequences get here. So I don't know where we go from here. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the kind of main takeaway from some of these conversations, is just that, our whole democracy, such as it is kind of, it exists to give a sort of legitimacy to this resource extraction project. I mean, that's the main goal for what these governments are here for in the first place.
Totally.
And that's the thing when we talk about what Wet'suwet'en are doing, or when we talk about Standing Rock or any of these other kind of land protectors. I mean, that's when you talk about what we do. They've been kind of telling us, they've been giving us the answer to that for many generations now, because that's really the only thing that is ever going to threaten the capital that is causing all of this, right? Is by literally putting our bodies in the way to ensure that these projects don't get built. That's exactly why these people are treated the way they are, by sending in militarized police forces to bust them up, because they're actually threatening the ability for these companies to continue these projects. And that's the thing. I think there's things we can do within our electoral system. I don't want to say that it's completely black pill anyone in this idea that anything can be accomplished, but really, ultimately, I think that's going to be the future of climate activism, and as well as the past, is by these kind of blockades and targeted actions at delaying or dismantling this infrastructure from being built in the first place.
Yeah, I agree on both of these. Although I will say, like, I think as there's more resistance, the state will also do more and more to repress obviously, I'm also not trying to blackpill anyone. I'm not trying to be like nothing will ever work, but
no, it is true though. It's undeniable.
Yeah. I mean, we saw like the horrendous, like just completely, I think clearly disgusting levels of repression at Standing Rock, with like private security hired and like, just like absurd like levels of crackdown on protesters' freedoms and shit like this. And I think that's not going to ramp down anytime soon. If there's more action, then there will also be more reaction. And I don't know what the answer is to that. Like, I'm not saying that means, obviously, that doesn't mean like activism is bad, or like don't try. But I guess
no. But I think it's a good point though, and it's like anyone that wants to get involved in that kind of activism has to be really clear-eyed about what that can potentially mean. There really isn't an easy answer to any of it. I mean, that's the reality that we're kind of faced with here.
That's true. Yeah, totally.
Well, on that uplifting note,
I know.
It's always happens.
God, that's so horrible.
We're doomed. Dharna, you had a job change lately. Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, I went full lamestream, baby.
So now you're part of the corporate democratic media, of course. That just seems to be what every media outlet is these days, or so I read online. But no, congrats. Exactly. You're at the Boston Globe now. It's a prestigious paper. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning paper. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. It's been pretty exciting and also very, very different, obviously. So
I can imagine.
Yeah.
But that rocks. Sure. Well deserved. Where can people follow you and read your work?
I am on Twitter at my name, which is probably you can see it in like the name of this episode or something, so I won't spell it.
Which we definitely will spell properly this time.
Yeah. And I am writing for the Boston Globe, so you can read my work there.
Well, thanks so much, Dharna, for joining us again. It was great to talk to you. And that's it. As depressing as some of these conversations can be, it is really inspiring to know that there are folks out there, in the activism world, in the media world, that are trying to indicate to people the level of crisis that we're dealing with. I mean, that's the only thing we can really latch on to now. So we really appreciate the work that you do. Thanks so much for coming on and breaking it down for us.
Thank you so much for having me, and right back at you. I think tying all of these things together and showing how they're related to all of the issues in foreign policy and the economy and everything is something that you all are clearly doing really well. So thanks for doing that too.
Well, that's kind of a positive note to leave it.
Yeah,
that's nice.
That's a good one.
Yeah, we did it. All is not lost.
We did it, Joe. Thanks, Dharna. We'll talk to you later.
Talk to you soon. Bye, y'all.
Thank you for listening to The Insurgents. Please remember to subscribe over at theinsurgents.substack.com. Find the podcast on all your favorite podcast apps, and please remember to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It's very helpful, and we appreciate it a lot. But please, again, don't mention Ken Klippenstein in the review. He is banned from the show. It's a lifetime ban, so please do not mention him in the review. And we'll be back later this week with more of the content that you know and love. Goodbye.